All right, you guys are live. I'll let people in as they go. So when you're ready, go ahead and share your screen and go for it. The rest of you, if you'd be so kind as to not speak or at least mute while he's speaking, appreciate it.
Okay, do we have the screen?
You should be able to. Do you have it?
Okay, there we go. There's some magic that needs to be done here.
Yeah, give me a second. I'm looking for
You
host
do.
tools. Enable waiting room. Okay, I got all that mess. Share screen. Allow. There we go. Try it now.
Okay, are we working?
It's not popping up yet.
Not popping up yet. Participant chat, react. There's more. I do this so infrequently, Joe. I think maybe you need to do something that allows me to.
Yeah, I did that under host tools. I said allow participants to share screen. So
Okay.
I would think you should be able to do it.
Well, I go back to my screen and you guys tell me if you see what I'm seeing.
No, not yet. But you got a button down there that says share. Have you clicking on that?
No, I gotta find it.
And for on my computer, it's way down at the bottom. It's green.
Oh, okay, there we go.
So once you click that, it should show whatever your desktop is showing.
How's that?
Not yet.
No, there's got to be something else. Okay. Application window, layout, share sound, optimize video sharing.
It shouldn't be too hard. Usually it's share screen and then a screen opens up and you got to click on like the monitor of your computer or laptop, whatever you're clicking, whatever you're using.
Okay, well, I've got the pop-up here.
Okay. Now there should
Okay,
be,
all right,
there you go. You got it now.
there's a share. Got it. Okay, well, uh, I usually have a target that I try to stick to, and it's basically a KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. Unfortunately, this presentation just grew and ended up with actually 33 slides. So some of the slides are easy to go through, others will uh, elicit questions and discussions. So,
So, Saba, we're seeing some black boxes. What I'd like you to do is if you look in the upper left part of your screen, there should be a, looks like a, what do you want to call it? Like an easel with a little board. It's the very top. There's a PowerPoint, a disk, an arrow back, a return arrow, and right next to that should be, go into projection mode. Or you can do it down at the bottom of your screen. You see where the slider bar is? It says 116%. That little easel looking thing right next to it. Click on that. There you go. Down right next to it. Left, left, left. Bingo.
what does that do?
That puts you in. All right. You still have a pop up box.
Yeah, I see that.
All right. There you're good. You're clear.
Okay. I have a pop-up box. Do you guys have one?
Nope, not now.
No. Okay. All right. Well, basically, what I tried to do is to go through a philatelic perspective of the territorial changes during the postage stamp era from 1850 to today, and how the politics affected all of this. So basically, we have a outline map of historical Hungary and how it shrunk down to today's Hungary. But that's and there are some sub sections in there that involve the territorial changes of the next 150 years. So starting with the revolution of the War for Independence, actually, of 1848-49, the Austrians, with the aid of the Russian Tsar Alexander, defeated the Hungarian aspirations for independence. So following the surrender of Gergely's army on August 13th, 1849, the Imperial Court of Vienna was determined to punish the rebellious Magyars. This task fell to Interior Minister Alexander Bach, who instituted the radical administrative changes. The traditional form of local government in Hungary was based on the vármegye, or the county system, and Bach abolished this. He also removed the areas of Transylvania, Croatia, the military border district, Vojvodina, and the Banat Temes from the lands of the Crown of St. Stephen. The rest of the country ended up being divided into 5 military administrative districts. And to rub salt in the wounds of Hungarians, the local administrators were paired up with German administrators who were brought into the country. These guys earned the derisive nickname of Bach Hussars. They were assigned to supervise the Hungarian civil servants. So basically, the next slide shows the traditional county system based on the vármegyes. And, they were pretty irregular and they differed in size, but the local issues were always administered through pretty much a compact neighboring area. So on the right side is what Bach did to Hungary. Divided the country into 5 administrative districts, and it removed the Transylvania, the Serbian regions, the Croatian regions, and this weird thing they called the military administrative district. So the stamps were issued in 1850, and Austria used the imperial symbols on the stamps, which in this case was the double-headed eagle with the imperial crown on top. And the 2 stamps on the left show the way that the postal system dealt with Germanizing the names of towns. Kassel became Kaschau, and in certain cases, like Kecskemét, there was no German equivalent, so they retained a Hungarian spelling. Now, the purists might say that the stamps of Austria used in Transylvania were really not used in Hungary. They were a separate region. And you can, bend that argument both ways, that they were traditional Hungarian areas, but in this particular case, they were sort of independent of Hungary. But anyway, here's an example of a stamp used in Kronstadt, which is Brassó in Hungarian, or Agram, which is Zagreb in Croatia, and then Mitrovic was in the military border region, which was a special administrative region to insulate the empire from the Ottoman Empire, which still controlled the areas to the south in the Balkans. And then Temesvar was in the Temesvar-Banat region. The stamps on the left show the different designs for the subsequent issues of 1858 through 1864. And in this case, there was an imperial symbol used again, but the other 2 issues showed the profile of the emperor. Now go back to the Bach era. The Hungarians practiced passive resistance. It involved mostly avoiding paying taxes wherever they could. And occasionally there was an armed resistance. Sándor Rózsa was a brigand in the Great Hungarian Plain, and he became a legend by, I guess, harassing anything imperial, stealing things from postal, like a stagecoach robbery in the Wild West. And General Klopka actually smuggled weapons into Transylvania from the Ottoman Empire to support a possible uprising. This was during the Austrian wars with France and Italy. One of the wars was in Italy in 1856, and Austria suffered a major defeat. And then in trying to become the leader of the German-speaking parts of Europe, the Habsburgs and the Prussians conducted a war. The worst defeat that Austria suffered was at Königgrätz. And as a result of the military campaigns, the treasury was bankrupt. At that time, Francis Joseph was forced to reconcile with the Hungarians in order to tap into the treasury, the taxes collected in Hungary to support the bankrupt imperial treasury. Deák and Andrássy negotiated a compromise which restored Hungary's constitutional autonomy and established a personal union whereby the emperor became king of Hungary. This was a complicated agreement, and in general, foreign policy and defense were to be jointly supported by taxes, but the civil administration inside of Hungary was up to the Hungarians. And picture on the left shows the coronation in 1867. And I found it interesting that the stamp showed again on the lower left is the only image of the revered king emperor that was used by the Hungarian post on a postage stamp. The various printings and perforation and watermark varieties exist, but it was a singular design. The Hungarian post preferred to use the national symbol, the crown, on postage stamps. So when the compromise took effect in early 1867, the Hungarian post was on the verge of becoming independent, so they ended up ordering stamps from Vienna because the Hungarian state printing office was not yet equipped to produce them. So the catalogs define this issue as kind of a joint issue. It's not necessarily Austria used in Hungary, but it's Hungarian stamps not being available at that time, that they considered that the Hungarian post used Austrian stamps. The design for this particular 1867 issue was neutral in terms of depicting any kind of imperial symbols. So it was just a portrait of the emperor king without any royal insignia. But I had long discussions with Zsuzsa Sipos, who wrote a book about this issue not being a joint issue, and I'm just going to go do a plug for that. This is strictly a Hungarian stamp issue that happened to be produced in Vienna. The Austrian post actually adopted this design and used it after the Hungarian post started using it. So the stamps of that first issue, there were 6 different values. They're shown at the top of the page. And there was a special 50 Kreuzar stamp issued later. But this design was not necessarily approved by the Hungarian Post, even though the Post ordered some of these stamps to be used mostly when money orders were instituted by the Post because they needed a higher value stamp. It turns out this stamp showed the emperor's portrait with the imperial crown. It was rather unpopular. Only 12,500 copies happened to have been delivered to Hungary, and examples of this stamp used in Hungary are scarce. Now, a very interesting error occurred. It's shown on the top right. The 5 Kreuzar red stamp happened to get a single impression of a 3 Kreuzar in the printing plate. And this particular error, I think there's probably less than 5 known, was strictly used in Hungary. Now, as far as the territory of the country was concerned, the compromise did not actually restore the borders that were prior to 1850. The Hungarian Post administration did not get extended to Croatia, Slavonia until April 1st of 68. And the military border was finally incorporated in January of 1871. So when we reach 1871, we could say that the southern border of historical Hungary was restored. To this as an aside in there, the lower right corner, the Hungarian Post inherited 6 post offices in Romania and operated them until March 31st of 1869. These stamps used in those post offices were denominated in soldi. They were the same stamps that the Austrian Post used for their offices in the Ottoman Empire at the time. Now, the peaceful days of the dual monarchy came to an abrupt end when World War I broke out. World War I did not, I should say, it affected the territory of Hungary in 2 places, briefly. The first was the Russian occupation of parts of Zemplén County in May to September of 1815 during the first Brusilov offensive. The second incursion occurred in August of 1916 when the Romanians attacked, and they marched 30, 40, 50 miles into Transylvania. But a concerted German Austro-Hungarian counteroffensive pushed them out by the next month. And after that, the Germans ended up defeating Romania and knocked them out of the war until the end of World War I. It is interesting that the Hungarian Post issued only 2 stamps that depicted war. These 2 semi-postals. They showed battle soldiers in battle. Now, the end of the dual monarchy occurred in Hungary on October 31st, 1918, when the government repudiated the compromise agreement and ended the personal union. Károly IV was the last Hungarian king, and he only reigned for 22 months. By the armistice was signed on November 11th. That was in effect on the Western Front, and Karoly abdicated the next day. The map below shows the demarcation lines as part of the armistice agreement. It started the process of the dismantling of historical Hungary, and the borders were not officially defined until the peace treaty was signed in 1920, but the military occupation resulted in fluid borders. You know, the little map on the lower left shows you know, the effective line of Czechoslovak control. And the first, the solid red line here shows the armistice agreement line that was supposed to be observed by the Serbian and Romanian armies. But then, you know, the Romanians continued their progress moving eastward until they actually captured Budapest. The map on the right, lower right, shows some of the changes that occurred in the time frame of 1919, where the Hungarian Soviet Republic actually pushed the Czechoslovak armies back, and then it collapsed against the Romanians. I have another map that shows a better explanation for all the changes that occurred in this time frame, and I came upon that. I remember that kind of late. That was like yesterday. I published an article about that in the October-December 2019 issue of the newsletter, and I'll show that map at the end of this presentation. So the political situation in 1918 and 1920 was kind of interesting. The government declared a People's Republic. That was the official title of it. It wasn't a republic, it was a People's Republic on the 16th of November of 1918. And that republic government collapsed, and the Soviet Republic came into effect from 21st of March to 1st of August of 1918, when the 2nd of August, the People's Republic was restored. And eventually the national government restored the monarchy in name only, and elected Miklos Horthy as a regent in February of 1920. All this time, the territorial borders were fluid. You know, there was not any particular official determination of where the borders were. It was basically determined by which army was occupying where. The Serbians crossed the border early on in November of 1918 with the help of the French, occupied parts of southern Hungary, not just Croatia, but actual Hungary. The Czechoslovak army crossed the northern borders at about the same time, and then Romanians came in from the east. Romanians ended up being the most successful occupiers because they occupied Budapest and parts of Transdanubia through November of 1919. And as everybody knows, you know, here are a few examples of stamps from the Republic, from the Soviet Republic, and the Regency. What's interesting, in the Regency, the country had officially been declared a kingdom, and Karoly made 2 attempts to regain his throne in 1920. And 1920 and 21. It was interesting that the successor states, Czechoslovakia primarily, were dead set against any Habsburg restoration. And if Horthy had not refused Karoly's demand to be in the uh, repositioned as a king of this kingdom, the Czechoslovaks would have invaded Hungary, and Hungary had no army really to repulse that. So Horthy was kind of in between a rock and a hard place. He was supposed to be minding the royalist sentiment in Hungary at the same time, wanted to keep the king out. Now, some of these occupations were preceded by political activity, and we go back to 1918, the end of the war. The Banat Republic was declared in the Temesvar region, but the Serbians invaded. More on that later, because the Serbians and the Romanians almost came to war with each other over the Banat. And the Banat Republic was a brief in duration. In November of 1918, the British, French, and Italian Americans actually occupied Fiume, which was a port city of Hungary attached to the crown lands back in the 18th century by Maria Theresa. The Serbs declared independence in the Banat, Bačka, and Baranja region to join the SHS kingdom. The Romanians in December 1st, 1918, had a major gathering at Alba Iulia to declare the Union of Transylvania with Romania, the Kingdom of Romania. And of course, the Croatians voted to abolish their connections with the Crown of Hungary. And finally, in September of 1919, Gabriele D'Annunzio and his legionnaires seized Fiume and established a city-state until it became part of Italy. So, we're leading into the actual dismemberment of Hungary. And this is a very, very rich area philatelically. I mean, there's hundreds of stamps that whether they're local issues or occupation issues, and you can argue that back and forth. And back in 2002, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, I published this article on the semantics of the occupation versus the local issues. And this, I'm going to beat my drum for this, because that proved to be one of my most popular articles that I've ever written. It was republished in the British Journal and the Cinderella Philatelist. It was translated into Czech, and it was used by Laszlo Kalai for his book on Romanian overprints in Transylvania. So I'm proud of myself for doing that. But anyway, it tabulates all the local issues and occupation issues that I've ever been able to, to put together, and put it together in a chronological order. It seems like during this time, everybody who wanted to express any kind of attachment, whether you're self-described or whether you're official, that you created stamps with symbols of their national sovereignty. They're too numerous to mention here, but Lawrence Skallock recently wrote this article in the journal, June issue, that provides a little more background on this. So if anybody wants to read up on that, that's a good place to start. Now, the borders were finally made official by the Treaty of Trianon in 1920. The terms of the treaty were dictated to Hungary. They were not negotiated. And they're named after the Grand Trianon Palace where the treaty was signed. Came into force 26th of July, 1921. And Hungary was left with only 28% of its land area and 36% of its pre-war population. Interestingly enough, Romania received more land that was left than that was left in Rump Hungary. But the borders did get minor adjustments through 1924. Now, there was 6 countries that benefited from this dismemberment, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, the SHS Kingdom, Italy, and Austria. And back a few years ago, Romania had the audacity to, issue this stamp shown in the lower right, which shows Greater Romania, which doesn't quite exist today because it includes Moldavia, Bessarabia, South Dobruja, and as well as Bukovina and as well as Transylvania. So, they're proud of their history. If the Hungarians ever did anything like that, oops, things would be different. It would be taken differently. It is interesting, the top right corner shows the delegation marching into the Trianon Palace to sign the peace treaty. The Hungarian ministers were kind of reluctant to do this, so they drew lots to pick 2 guys who from the government who would sign the treaty. So, they wouldn't necessarily be condemned by the general population for having sold out the country. Now, the Trianon borders of Hungary is pretty much in existence today with minor adjustments, but and not to mention the major adjustments that were done during the World War II area, but I'm just going to touch on the minor adjustments first. In 1924, the village and surrounding area of Somoskő, we follow, were returned to Hungary. And why was this? Because a fellow named Kapusiak owned the stone quarries around Somoskő, we follow, and he used to provide the paving stones for the streets of Budapest from his mines. And because, if the area fell into Czechoslovakia, there was hard to move the stones into Hungary because the Czechs really wanted to, give it to the Hungarians, and the trade was kind of restricted. The argument was that the basalt being mined around from Lake Balaton was not as good as the stuff out of Somoskő we followed. So this guy was friends with one of the generals who was stationed in Hungary, but he was responsible for administering the things with the League of Nations. So he was able to convince this general to push through the League of Nations for the return of this village and the surrounding mines to Hungary. So that happened in 1924. The borders with the Romanians were pretty stable until 1940, because once the Romanians left Debrecen in early 1920, things were stable, and the Serbs were a little more reluctant to leave Hungary. And when the treaty was supposed to come into effect in August of 1920, they made the last effort to keep some of the area around Page and Boya as part of the Serbian lands. And they established this Baranja Boya Serbian-Hungarian Republic, which lasted for 6 days. But then the border was eventually stabilized by August, and it was in such a state until April 1941. Now, the western border provided a very interesting philatelic story. Parts of three counties were supposed to go to Austria 1 year after the treaty effect. This was in 1921. So around August of 1921, the Austrians were ready to move in to this area. The Hungarian government tried to delay the transfer and requested a plebiscite for Sopron, which was the largest city in the area. And these actions precipitated the Leuterbandschlag insurrection between September and December of 1921. And resultant changes are shown in the next slide. The government sort of secretly sanctioned the insurrection by the Rongersgarde, or the Ragged Guards, who happened to successfully repel the Austrian gendarmes moving in to take possession of the area in August of 1921. And by October, they declared the Banat of Leuterbandschlag. And for the next, basically 1 month, they fought the Austrians to a standstill. The gendarmes, the Austrians, their attitude was that they were not a military organization. They were more like maintaining civil order, so they weren't going to fight a military type insurrection. So they basically withdrew. Of course, Hungary was being pressured into meeting its treaty obligations, so they I think it was in Venice that they met the Austrians and Hungarians and negotiated that a plebiscite was going to be held for Sopron, and which took place in December, and Sopron voted to stay in Hungary. And then the formal handover was on January 1st of 1922. And the rest of the area became the Austrian state of Burgenland. And the next slide shows, excuse me, shows the outline of Burgenland as we know it, and the rather complex border adjustments that were done to that particular area. Now here in the yellow is Sopron and the surrounding villages that stayed in Hungary. And then in the green, in 1922, the League of Nations turned these villages over to Hungary from Austria. At the same time, the village in blue, Hungary turned over to Austria. So it wasn't until 1922 that the western border of Hungary was finalized, or the Trianon border. And the philately of Leuterbandschlag is very interesting. It's a kind of a fun area. Considering it in the 3-month time frame, over 100 different postage stamps were issued by the insurgents, basically to raise money for the uprising. And here's an article I wrote back in January, March of 21, the newsletter that kind of gives a background of I call it the operetta statelet of Leuterbandschlag, a very interesting piece of Hungarian philatelic history. Now, the politics of the Horthy era, which was between the two wars, the focus was on territorial revision. Of course, Hungary didn't have the military capability to exert its influence on the successor states, but at least they tried to do it diplomatically. As a result of these efforts, the Czechoslovaks, Romania, and Yugoslav governments formed the Petite Entente in 1920 to thwart any kind of Hungarian territorial revisionism. Hungary did find a champion in Lord Rothermere, who publicly and politically in the British Parliament advocated for the revision of the Trianon Treaty. He also funded the Justice for Hungary airplane flight in 1931. It's an interesting postcard that was carried on the flight that's addressed to Lord Rothermere, which leads us into World War One. Because Hitler advocated the return of the German-speaking areas of Bohemia to the Reich, Hungary was kind of dovetailing its demands for the revision based on along the ethnic boundary between Slovakia and Hungary. So negotiations started in November of 1938 between the two governments, and this map shows the different proposals. The yellow was what the Czechoslovak government was offering to return to Hungary with the first offer. Then the light blue was their second offer, and the third was the dark blue. And the Hungarian government wanted the territory that was included with the green, and it ended up getting the red. So basically, you know, it fairly closely followed the ethnic boundary, you know, with the Hungarian ethnics versus where the split was between the Hungarians and the Slovaks. Since the two governments couldn't really come to an agreement, the Germans and the Italians, the government decided to arbitrate, basically just dictate where the border was going to be. And picture on the upper right here shows the foreign ministers of Hungary and Czechoslovakia, with Ciano and Ribbentrop with Italy and Germany, respectively. Basically, between 5 and 10 November 1938, Hungary occupied the area shown here in the purple. And there were minor adjustments made to this border in the following March, when villages were turned back over to Slovakia. Čechly, Svalajt, Žitvo were the ones that had post offices. The other smaller villages did not have. So they're as a result of these minor adjustments, the northern border was finalized with Slovakia until the end of the closing days of the World War II. The philately, okay, you know, we got the Hazateres homecoming cancellations starting December. Oh, okay, the Hazateres homecoming stamps were issued in December 1st, 1938. The Visatir cancellations were used between October and December as the military went ahead and reoccupied the area. Ipolyag was the first town returned, basically at the start of the negotiations between Hungary and Hungarian and the Czech governments. enterprising stamp dealers in Budapest actually made cancellations for the post offices that were actually returned to Slovakia. It was the last day at check lace on the 14th of March, 1939. The Slovak post office is used a similar, returned to us at check lease the next day. It is interesting that, this particular slogan, Slovak, is being used right now on a lot of bogus overprints manufactured and offered on outlets like eBay, to confound the philatelists. This was the only legitimate use of that particular slogan in Slovak that you were returned to us. No stamps were ever issued, but fantasy things have hit the marketplace. Now, Carpatho, Ukraine, was occupied unilaterally by the Hungarians. The day after it separated from Czechoslovakia on the 14th of March, it was a statelet that was independent for one day only. It was occupied the next day by the Hungarians, and this was to reestablish they called it the 1,000-year common frontier with Poland, which, as it turns out, in the same year, it allowed the Poles to escape the Russian, German invasion of their country, and something like 50,000 Poles sought refuge in Hungary, of which a lot of them were soldiers who went on to fight on the Western Front with Sikorsky's Polish army. On a personal note, my father happened to be in the Hungarian military in the 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion, and he in 1938 was sent to Kassa. That was the target of his unit, and from there he went on to take part in the Carpatho-Ukrainian occupation in Hust, and eventually ended up being a part of the Slovak-Hungarian War the following month, which we'll get to in the next slide. The occupation of Carpatho, Ukraine, was not something that the post office anticipated, so they did not have any visatert cancellations for use in that territory. They basically just used their provisional steel and some rubber cancels in that area. The reorganization of Carpatho, Ukraine in 1940 resulted in bilingual cancels, used Hungarian routine. And here are some examples. The stamp dealers of Budapest were always eager to get examples for collectors. Here's the rubber 102 cancel that was used in Hust. The 303 steel die cancel was used in Alsó-Verecke, and then eventually, the bilingual Hungarian routine in Körösmező. The Slovak-Hungarian War was fought over territory in order to secure the railroad line between Ungvar and the Polish border. And that's the little inset that I have on the lower right corner, which shows the railroad line running pretty close to where the actual border was at the time. And the Hungarians decided that, they needed to secure this line. So they basically gave an ultimatum to the Slovaks, to get out of the way. And then the war lasted about a week. My father said that he was down at Shobrans in the thick of the fighting, and then it basically he said it took them a couple of days. They ended up disabling a Slovak armored carrier and shooting down an airplane. The next day, after the war was over, they went swimming in some creek nearby. But eventually, the Slovaks surrendered the area, Hungary, on April 3rd, 1939. And Shobrans was the largest settlement there. There were some other minor uh, villages that had postal agencies, and one philatelist took advantage of the you know the strange occurrences happening at that time. They ended up sending a bunch of mixed franking envelopes to Herrn in Rotterdam. There's a lot of these around. And here's an example that was sent from Shobrans on May 1939, and it was actually postally used because it's got a Rotterdam backstamp on 22nd of March. The Hungarians and the Romanians nearly went to war with each other in the summer of 1940. The Germans did not like that because they relied on the Romanian oil. So they wanted to facilitate a compromise between the two allies, and started the negotiations started in 1940, but they failed because neither side would budge, and eventually sent to foreign ministers Ciano and Ribbentrop provided the arbitration in Vienna. It's called the Second Vienna Arbitral Award. In August of 1940, Romania was given 14 days to evacuate the territory. And basically, the territory was to make sure that the Hungarian Székely regions down in the farthest easternmost tip of Transylvania were given to Hungary. And the area had a large percentage Hungarian population, but it was the same time it still had a large percentage of Romanians. The Hungarians that were left in the southern part of Transylvania were less numerous, so that's why the arbitrators felt that it was the right thing to do was to return northern Transylvania to Hungary. Now, one thing I didn't mention when the Treaty of Trianon was being formulated, that the successor states wanted to make sure that they retained the railroad lines, for example, running along the western edge of Transylvania between Nagyvárad, Szatmárné, Meti, etc. They wanted to maintain control of that. And I read a book, it was a while ago, that said that the railroad lines were the ones that were the location of the railroad lines were the main reason that the borders were drawn the way they were drawn. The philately of the Second Vienna Arbitral Award is very similar to the philately of the First Arbitral Award. Had a stamp issued on 5 September, and visa-tiered cancellations were used in 20 different towns between September 5th and October 15th. Now we get into the complicated occupation of southern Hungary. The Germans and the Yugoslavs were at odds in terms of foreign policy. There was a coup d'etat in Yugoslavia, which prevented the German sympathetic government from concluding negotiations with Germany because the Germans wanted to support the Italian troops in Greece, and they needed to march to Yugoslavia. But anyway, the anti-military coup d'etat in Belgrade resulted in Germany's decision to attack Yugoslavia. At that time, Prime Minister Teleki advised against allowing Hungary to use its territory for the attack because 4 months earlier, Hungary had signed an eternal friendship treaty with Yugoslavia. He could not persuade Horthy from acquiescing to this, so Teleki ended up committing suicide. Hungary used the pretext that Croatia separated from Yugoslavia on April 10th, and as a basis for saying that the Eternal Treaty of Friendship was null and void. As a result, the next day, the Hungarians crossed the southern border and occupied basically 4 different spots of territory. Muravidek, Prekmuria, Muraközpedi, they're in Slovenia right now. They occupied the Baranya Triangle, which is a geographical area outlined by the Drava River and the Danube, and then the Bachka area. The Germans retained possession of the Banat area. They never, right there, that was part of historical Hungary, but I think they wanted to make sure that they maintained control over that. Again, the philately of this, the southern border was basically the same as before. Stamps were issued and visitor cancellations used. It happened to be in 11 different towns. Again, I have a little personal connection. My grandfather was a municipal policeman in Esztergom, and he was assigned to be a policeman in Zombor, in one of the big towns of the occupied Baranya. And he was stationed there for 6 months. And he didn't quite like that particular assignment because they had to be on patrol carrying a gun all the time. And he thought that was just kind of hard on him. And World War II ended the revisionist Hungary. The Horthy wanted to surrender to the Russians on October 15th, but it was an abysmal failure because he didn't get his army to stop fighting fighting the Russians alongside the Germans. The Romanians did the opposite. They turned in August of 1944. They surrendered to the Russians. At the same time, they decided to fight the Germans. The Red Army crossed the Trianon border in September, and Hungary ended up being a battleground until April of 1945. In between, the interim government signed the armistice on January 20th, and part of the reasoning, part of the stipulation was that Hungary would withdraw within the 1937 Trianon borders. So the little map on the lower right shows the different states that ended up back to with the territory that Hungary acquired prior to World War II. The only change was that Carpatho, Ukraine was ceded over to the Soviet Union by the Czechs. The Treaty of Paris in February of 1947 finalized the peace with Hungary's neighbors. The last change to the territory occurred through that treaty. The Pozsony, the Bratislava bridgehead, was enlarged by annexing 3 Hungarian villages to Czechoslovakia. Horvátjárfalu, Orosvár, Dunacsúny. Earlier in the world, in Trianon, the village of Pozsony Petržalka, opposite Bratislava, was given to Czechoslovakia. Prior to that, they did not extend to the right bank of the Danube. The Czechs did not extend. So that was just enlarging the Bratislava bridgehead. And as I said, I didn't have any artifacts to illustrate this, but Paul came up with a copy of a postcard that we used in Dunacsúny. I gotta go. I gotta change here, and I don't know how to. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to go back and find my other things here. Share. There we go. Share. Okay. We see that? This is the Postal Agency of Dunacsúny, February 13, 1947. Probably the last month of Hungarian use in that village that was given over to the Czechs. All right, one more. Where are we? Here we go. Share. Okay, this is the map that I thought was more detailed about the various occupation zones of from November 18 to December of 21. It shows that there were 2 lines of demarcation negotiated with the Czechoslovaks. The original one was farther north. The second was dictated by the Entente, which pretty much closely follows the actual Trianon border. On the south, it shows the original armistice line that was the same as in my other slide. And it shows the Romanian line of control, and the thing with the Vígsz memorandum, where the Hungarians were ordered to go back farther into Hungary, which resulted in the resignation of the Republican government to turn over power to the Soviet Republic. Interestingly enough, there's a little bit of the area here between Szeged and Arad that was occupied by the French, and that was to this area to keep the Romanians and the SHS, the Serbs, from fighting. The one thing that I know nothing about, this particular area of Carpatho, Ukraine, was temporarily attached to the Western Ukrainian Republic, and I just don't have enough information on that stuff. And I don't think I've ever seen any philately on it. There were some discussion. There were certain villages around the Tisa River here between Romania and Czechoslovakia that changed hands between the two countries, and there are scarce philatelic artifacts for that. So basically, that's it. Turn it over to questions if anybody wants.
Csaba, that was a great presentation, I gotta admit.
Comments. I'm running out of that. Steve. Oh, and anyway, I guess I didn't get to the last slide. It's by reference. And if anybody wants any larger or detailed images that I used here, because I had to shrink everything up, I'll be happy to send it out.
Oh, I had a question. First, I'd like to introduce myself, if I may. I'm a new
Okay.
member. My name is Jeff Toth, and it's JD Toth in the pictures there. But your slide 18 has a picture of the postcard, the Rothermere postcard.
Yes.
The imprinted stamp on the upper right-hand corner. I'm having trouble finding an image of that on the internet that's clear enough to look at, but I don't know if yours is any clearer when you zoom in on it. I can't quite make out the image. I think I see Detroit to Budapest on the.
Well, a lot of these cards were collected in Detroit, and they're canceled in Detroit.
Okay, but is there a better
you're talking
image
about
of-
little dove image?
It's a dove.
Yeah.
Okay,
I can send you my originals scan of that postcard.
Okay, if you can, I'd appreciate that, just for my reference.
Yeah, just drop me a line. It's Csaba Kohalmi at yahoo.com.
Okay, I'll do that. And very good presentation. This was going to be my exposure to the first Zoom meeting, so I'm interested in the poster stamps that's coming up in the next presentation, but you had a very good presentation. I'm glad I attended it. Thank you.
Csaba, Vic Barris, I've got a.
How are you doing, Wick?
Good, thank you. I've got a question. Was there any Hungarian postal service involvement in the Bosnian War of, I think it was 1873, or right after it?
Well, Bill Maddox would be the right person to ask that question. And like the Hungarian Black Book, they show Bosnian stamps because Hungary was supposed to administer the postal service in Bosnia once it was annexed. So I really don't know. That's one thing I stayed away from.
I know that Hungarian troops were involved in the Bosnian War because my great-grandfather was among them. But okay, so you don't have any knowledge of that.
I don't have any knowledge of that, sorry.
The other question that I have, and it doesn't really relate to philately so much as territorial changes. Is there any information in English on the details of Szeged during the French occupation period when Horthy's national government was established there?
Well, I'm going to turn the question over to Robert. You got one of my articles on that.
Sorry, what was that? What was the question?
We're
Vic?
talking about the Szeged occupation by the French.
That 2-year period. Do you know of any anything in English with the details of the occupation of Szeged?
Yes, as a matter of fact, because if my increasingly feeble memory is correct, Csaba wrote an article which is sitting in my to be published pile about Szeged. So that will show up in the next couple of probably one of the next couple of issues of the news, Vic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Now, just while I'm thinking about this, or your question about Bosnia, Vic.
Yeah.
There was back in, and I just ducked to take a look, and I'm just not sure which year it was in, but there was an article in the news about the Hungarian philatelic connection with the occupation of Bosnia.
This was with regard to post offices after the end of the war. Okay.
Yes, actually. And so I will I will find which issue of the news that is in, Vic, and I will flip it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I was thinking about whether there was any military type of postage during the war.
I think there was, because I mean, initially before, and this is I'm going from memory here, that initially Hungarian stamps were used in part of occupied Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Austrian stamps were used in other sections of the country. And I think it had something to do with the which side of the military post office line you were on, because some of them used some of the cancels used Roman numerals, and some used um, Arabic numerals to distinguish them, and that was the dividing line between where the Austrian and the Hungarian postal or military postal systems operated in Bosnia. Again, if my memory serves me correctly, but I know there's an article in the news somewhere, so I'll dig that out for you, Vic, because I think that'll answer your question.
Thank you very much.
Anna Trishan here. I'd like to introduce one of the newest members of our society, RP Ivanios. He's interested in Hungarian philately, and his father was also a longtime collector. Would you like to say hello?
You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just figured that out. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you all. It was a very interesting discussion, so thank you for that. And I'm here to learn and listen, but I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I would like to thank the presentation, Csaba. That was very interesting for me personally, because I was surprised to see the mention of Petržalka, because that's where I went to high school.
Well, actually, my family, split after World War II. My uncle went to live in Trenčín and raised his kids there. And my cousin lived in Petržalka back about 20 years ago. And I went and visited him, and I drove through Dunachun, et cetera, to get there. And so
it's very surprising to many people, and myself too, that all this information was not available in the schools when I went to school. This is a completely new part of the history. When I went to school, all we learned was from 1917, Russian Revolution, and all that garbage. And this kind of information is very
refreshing.
educational for me, because I get to see the other side of what was not mentioned when I went to school.
Well, I
thank
agree
you very
with
much for it. It was very good.
I agree with you, because I spent 10 years in Hungary, and I remember what the focus was on all the time. It was always the great Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And you didn't really go into the details of your own nationality.
Going back to the presentation, I noticed there was a mention of the King Károly only reigned for 22 months. Do you have any more specific period? because the kingdom ended in 1918, and there was no 22-month period before he abdicated,
Well,
as far as I could see.
he was crowned in December of 1916.
I see.
So he ruled the entire year of 1917 until November of 1918.
Okay, that explains, because again, my lack of education from that historical period prompted me to ask the question, but that makes sense. Thank you.
Csaba, at the beginning of your talk, you said that the Serbian areas were removed during the Bach era.
Yeah.
They weren't claimed by Austria-Hungary at that time at all?
Well, no, they were part of the Austrian Empire, but they were not part of the crown lands of St. Stephen.
Okay.
So they were technically not part of Hungary at that time.
Were they claimed by Serbia or nobody?
No. They were part of Austria,
Okay.
the Austrian Empire.
Okay.
You know, they were just administered differently.
I see. Thank you.
All right, folks, I think I'm going to end the recording. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Vic, if you're still on, the issue that's got the stuff on Bosnia and Herzegovina in it is the July to September 2018 issue. So volume 49, number 3.